Order and welcome all members to the 46th meeting of the Committee for Communities. Can I remind anyone in the public gallery that mobile phones must be turned off. Mobile tablet devices can, however, be used through the PRONI Wi-Fi connection, and all devices should be muted. No recordings or photographs are to be taken. Can I remind members about the protocols regarding the use of electronic devices? Please switch all mobile devices to airplane mode and activate your Wi-Fi connection. Please also use tablets discreetly and in a way which does not interfere with the proceedings. So, agenda item 1, members, declaration of interests. I would remind members of your responsibility to declare any interest in any of the items under discussion today. Do any members of any interest wish to declare in relation to today's agenda?
No.
Thank you, members. Moving on to apologies, members, then. We have apologies today from Kelly Armstrong, Melissa McHugh and Nicola Brogan. Are members aware of any other apologies? No? Clerk? Aware of any? No? OK, thank you. Agenda item 3 then, members, chairperson's business. Can I welcome first in the public gallery 3 new members of the Assembly Commission staff who will be working to develop and evolve the Assembly's scrutiny work. Patrice Morris will be working with the Communities Committee team as we consider primary and secondary legislation, and Glenda Doherty and Fiona Rooney will be working with the Education and Finance Committees respectively. So you're all very, very welcome. Look forward to working with you. Members, in relation to the anti-poverty strategy, as we are aware, the strategy was given executive approval last Thursday. However, we have still not received a date from the officials to brief on it. We last asked for a copy of the draft strategy on the 10th of March and received a departmental reply on 23rd of April, stating that until the executive agrees the content of the paper and a draft anti-poverty strategy, it would not be appropriate to put its contents in the public domain. The committee staff are aware of a further departmental response on our queries on social inclusion strategies, which is on its way but hasn't arrived in time for consideration at today's meeting. So, members, given that we had asked to be briefed before the draft went to the executive, we can pick this up next week in relation to writing to the Minister to ask when he expects to publish the strategy, so that stakeholders, including ourselves, can engage and to give us timelines for when the consultation will take place and when he hopes the final strategy might be published. OK, members, today's meeting is very much focused on the work of PRONI, but before I go to that, I will also note that the Prime Minister yesterday indicated at question time that the winter fuel payment threshold will be changed to allow more pensioners, and that's in speech marks, to qualify again. The Minister for Communities also yesterday then urged for the return of universal winter fuel payments. This committee is and has been very concerned about benefit reduction, and this is a good news story, although we will be watching for the detail in relation to this apparent U-turn, and I know there are concerns among the sector about what that might mean in other aspects of support. So I think it's one that this committee will have to maintain a close eye on. Mm-hmm. So, as stated there, today we're really focusing on the work of PRONI, and so following standing agenda items, we will first receive a briefing from Karen McCallion in the RAISE team, considering parliamentary oversight of public records in different jurisdictions. And then, following the meeting, we will have a tour of the building here and the opportunity to learn more about PRONI's statutory duties, quality assuring the contents of schedules and laying them before the Assembly. So I would encourage everyone to stay for the tour. So, members, by your agreement, I propose that we maybe move now to that RAISE briefing. Would members be content to do so? And a return to items 4, 5 and 6 then, and other items following. Mm-hmm. So, members content? Yep. OK, so we'll then proceed to the RAISE briefing from Karen. OK, thank you.
Keep going with this order just in case. Yeah.
OK, members, so thank you. And moving on then to agenda item 7, which is the RAISE briefing on parliamentary oversight of retention and disposal schedules. Papers for this agenda item, members, start at page 274 of your pack. And I now welcome Assembly official Karen McCallion, researcher, to the meeting. You're very welcome, Karen. And would you go ahead with your briefing, Karen, and then we'll go to members for any questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, members, and thank you for the opportunity to brief you today on retention and disposal schedules, comparing parliamentary oversight processes in the Northern Ireland Assembly with legislatures in the UK and Ireland. The paper starts on page 274 of your packs, and today's briefing will cover an explanation of what retention and disposal schedules are and their legislative context in Northern Ireland, the steps involved in the scrutiny process by the Assembly, how the approach in the Assembly compares to other jurisdictions, and considerations for retention and disposal of records regarding EU-funded projects, specifically looking at the criteria for the European Social Fund for the 2014 to the 2020 programme. And then I've also included some scrutiny points that aren't in the paper at the moment, but they may be points that members may wish to consider with officials during the tour later on. So in terms of what a retention and disposal schedule is, the definitions included on page 278. Retention and disposal schedules are record management tools. They document types of records held by public bodies, defining how long records should be retained and specifying what actions are required after the retention period ends. And these actions may involve destruction, review, permanent retention or transfer to the Public Record Office in Northern Ireland. Retention and disposal schedules are created to be legally compliant and ensure transparency and accountability in public administration. The legislative framework underpinning retention and disposal schedules includes the Public Records Act of Northern Ireland of 1923, the Disposal of Documents Order of Northern Ireland in 1925, and then more recent, the Data Protection Act of 2018 and the Freedom of Information Act of 2000. There's other acts and orders as well, which are included in the paper. So in terms of the process, the overview process that happens before these documents arrive at the Assembly, public bodies must develop these schedules, and then PRONI reviews and approves through an iterative quality assurance process. So it goes back and forth between the public body and PRONI through this quality assurance procedure. And then once finalised, the schedules are then signed by senior officials, including relevant senior departmental officials, but also the Minister for Communities, and then they're laid before the Assembly. Once they're at the Assembly, they're subject to a negative resolution procedure, and that provides committees with a window of 10 sitting days or 30 calendar days for members to object if necessary. And if no objections are raised, the schedules then become legally binding. So in terms of what I was asked to really review is how does the process here compare with jurisdictions elsewhere. So Northern Ireland has what could be described as a uniquely rigorous process for the scrutiny of retention and disposal schedules. It's the only legislature that I could find where public body schedules are directly reviewed by committees, including the option to annul them through parliamentary procedure, through the negative resolution procedure. And this role is separate from the scrutiny of PRONI's annual report, which provides a broader overview of records management performance and the compliance across public bodies. So in comparison to other legislatures, such as the UK Parliament and the Houses of the Oireachtas, they focus on oversight through the annual reports or high-level policies and regulations, but without direct engagement in individual retention and disposal schedules. So, for example, public records in Wales are reviewed by the UK's National Archives. An exception to that are records of the Shenif Commission. So following the Government of Wales Act of 2006, a concordat between the UK National Archives and the Shenif Commission sets out the process for managing specifically Welsh public records. But this, from what I could find, doesn't include oversight of individual public bodies' retention and disposal schedules, so that those aren't looked at by, from what I can see, by Shenif committees. In Scotland, the National Records of Scotland manages the process, and annual reports are laid at the Scottish Parliament. But committees, again, from what I can find, don't appear to scrutinise individual retention and disposal schedules for individual public bodies. Another question that the committee asked for was around the retention and disposal of EU funding records, and the information around that is on page 286 of your packs. For records related to EU-funded programmes, the specific rules apply under Article 140 of the Common Provisions Regulation. So, for example, the European Social Fund the records for the 2014 to the 2020 funding programme need to be retained until at least the 31st of December 2030. And the records that is pertaining to include things like timesheets, claims and any correspondence as well. So organisations must also comply with GDPR principles such as data minimisation and ensure records are accessible then for audits and for verification. So when organisations close, they must transfer their records to the managing authority to then maintain compliance. And then just to sum up, really, something that I've included that isn't in the paper, but some points that members might want to consider further when speaking with officials later today, is that maybe if there would be possible to have any examples provided of retention and disposal schedules that faced significant scrutiny or objection, and to find out kind of what lessons were learnt from that process. Also, maybe what challenges arise in implementing the schedules, particularly with the evolving technologies, with the digitalisation of public records, and also change in legislative requirements, particularly the more recent laws in terms of data protection and freedom of information. And then, are there recurring trends in public authority submission that members should be aware of? So, for example, trends in terms of delays, and what have the implications been for PRONI in terms of that change from the 30-year to the 20-year rule? And then how does PRONI balance the efficiency and transparency in its iterative quality assurance process? So thanks very much for your time this morning, and happy to take any questions.
Karen, that's very useful, and I am very conscious that some of the questions I and others may ask are probably more for PRONI or whatever, and that's absolutely understandable. There was a very focused remit for your work. It's an area, I think, of great interest, I have to say, in general, and I very much appreciate your work in clarifying those other approaches. And the paper does seem to provide a fairly positive summary of records management here, and that is more rigorous, probably. With that additional parliamentary oversight aspect. Is that a fair conclusion, and are you aware of evidence that the process does indeed work well?
I think from what I've seen is that we have a different system here because the legislation is different. And it all stems back to the 1923 legislation and the 1925 legislation. So elsewhere, it's I think for GB it's 1958. For Scotland it's 2011. And obviously the Freedom of Information Act and the Data Protection Acts have evolved things. So I think that's why there's been more of a focus on that. But also the other reason that there's maybe more of these retention and disposal schedules coming through is because of that change of the 30-year to the 20-year rule. But in terms of, I spoke to PRONI officials in writing the paper, and also spoke to the Assembly's data protection officer, and the view is that the process here is very rigorous. So and that oversight that we have here is unique, you know. So in terms of whether it works better or than elsewhere, I it would probably be interesting to ask the officials of their opinion of that, of having been involved in the process and in the fact that more of these schedules are coming through to the Assembly at the moment as well. So,
and just on that one, and them coming through, what changed to require them to come through? And I have to say I do welcome that additional layer of oversight, and I want to ensure that we as a committee are across our responsibilities in dealing with that. So what changed so that the system changed a number of months ago whereby they started coming through committee?
I think that it would be valuable for members to speak with the business office about the reason for the memo in January. But from what I can see in terms of more recently, it's in the 1923 legislation that these are the information about disposal of records has to be laid at the Parliament, the House of Parliament, as it was at that time. And then the Freedom of Information Act and data protection, particularly the Freedom of Information Act, Section 46 of that, that's the basis for the guidance around retention and disposal schedules. And then obviously there's been different periods between COVID and the Assembly being down, that it's more recently that this has been looked at again. So I think it would be useful to speak to the Business Office around that.
Okay, and linked to that then, so it states in your paper that any member or committee can table a question to PRONI to seek clarification. Can you expand on that process, or is that something that maybe we should raise with Business Office as well in terms of how that process works?
So I think the committee process is similar to with any statutory rules. So it's raising it that it'll be brought to the committee in the same way as a statutory rule was, because the Communities Minister is essentially the keeper of the records. The Minister will sign off on all of these retention and disposal schedules, and then that's why it comes. Every schedule comes to the Communities Committee, but other committees will be presented with the retention and disposal schedules for their particular departments and arm's length bodies. So in terms of the process for that, it is the same as the statutory rule. So if members are seeking more information on that, I think the Business Office, but also potentially the examiner statutory rules as well, because it's the negative resolution procedure. But obviously it's not. So it's the same sort of process as that.
Okay, and in terms of public, I suppose, interaction around this. So there's a definition, or is there a definition of long-term value? Because it seems rather vague, and I suppose value is very subjective. So is there potential for individuals or groups who think maybe the particular sets of records, and in the context of very many contested records and I suppose controversial issues, is there a way for the public to interact in that process or appeal?
I think that it would be worth speaking to PRONI about that, because in the guidelines that PRONI have issued around the creation of retention and disposal schedules, it sets out quite a thorough process, an iterative process that happens between the department and then there'll be an information management board that's set up around this, and then also the records going back and forth between the public body and PRONI as well. But in terms of members of the public engagement in that, I think that it would be worth asking PRONI about that. My understanding is that it's a board that's set up within the department or the public body, and then but then once the retention and disposal schedules are created and signed off, I mean they're published, so that they'll be on the like council's website and that type of thing. But it's really, the schedules are, it's rather than listing every individual document, it's more the categories of documents. So I don't know from that whether it would be possible to appeal a decision about from a member of the public. But so that would be something to find out, because there's also something that happens in Northern Ireland is with the sensitivity review, and that that's a close inspection of anything that's potentially contentious and that side of it.
Okay, thank you. And the last one for me before I go to members then is around, and you'd mentioned GDPR there, and I suppose I'm a huge advocate of GDPR in the sense of people's data needing to be protected, but also have experience as a constituency rep of, for example, a council saying we're not going to discuss your constituents' issue with you due to GDPR. But setting that aside, this process, our more rigorous a system seems to have survived the introduction of GDPR fairly unhindered. Would that be fair to say?
I think the guidance has been influenced by those changes in legislation as well. But from what I can see, that it dovetails, I suppose, and that you're following the same guidelines from GDPR as whenever you're putting the retention and disposal schedules together, and then how the records themselves are handled. So it's coming from that, and particularly that's Section 46 of the Freedom of Information Act as well. So.
Okay, thank you, members. Brian.
Okay,
thank you.
Chair. Thank you, Karen, for the paper. And again, the questions might be more for PRONI officials, but I'll ask them anyway. First of all, the requirement through the 1923 Act is for all public authorities. Is that right? I mean, in a letter we received in advance of our meeting, it talks about the retention disposal procedures being received from 6 councils in Armagh Planetarium. But I'm not sure, is that just the number that have submitted them this year so far?
Yeah.
Or is there a distinction, or is it all public?
It's all public bodies.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just the current head count. Right.
Also, what's quite interesting is depending on where you look for the legislation. So on the UK Gov legislation website, they'll have the sort of updates that have happened through different statutory instruments that have So there's a 1999 statutory instrument 663 that has then that was where it was the Minister for Culture, Arts and Leisure that was named as the, I suppose, the kind of keeper of the records, but and that these schedules are to kind of go through that process with the minister before they come to the Assembly. Whereas in the 1923 legislation, it talks about the Governor of Northern Ireland, and the Minister of Finance is actually mentioned more specifically. So so in terms of public bodies or public authorities, the language has, I suppose, sort of changed more recently. So from my understanding, is it's all public authorities.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And obviously, well, the 1923 legislation was written when everything was paperwork. It's been amended in 2018 and maybe at other times. So in the modern era of more electronic storage, what is the requirement? Can documents be digitised and stored that way, or do original paper documents? And there's a value to original paper document, but they all take up space. So is there guidance, or is there a requirement in legislation regarding what can be digitised and what needs to be kept as paper?
In the guidance, there's code of practice that follows from the legislation, and then PRONI also have guidance around how they digitise records that come into them. Now that's if they get transferred to PRONI, but that is part of it. And then within the EU records, emails and things like that are part of what's to be kept. But again, there's with each of these different areas, there's very specific guidance on what is to be kept and how to be kept, and like how to close a file. When does a file become that you sort of close off that project, and then no more records are added to it. So all of that is set out in the.
Okay. And one last question. In terms of the release of public documents, which happens, when we get historic documents released, and some of that's happening at a national level, what is the system in Northern Ireland for release of public documents, historical information?
I suppose that's kind of outside the scope of this paper, but so that would be something to discuss with PRONI. But yeah, they'll be able to give you the step by step how that process happens, because again, that includes things like that sensitivity review and different steps that happen before then it's released to the public. So there's potentially a redaction process that needs to happen and things like that as well.
So that's not part of the
retention disposal. The retention disposal schedules, the way I've understood it is it's essentially categorising what you've got and sort of setting that all out, and then making decisions about when it will be destroyed, or if it's to be retained by the public body, which is an exceptional point. Most of the times after 20 years it's to be transferred to PRONI, but that's again part of that iterative process that goes on before the retention and disposal schedule comes to the Assembly and is signed off by the Minister. There's a lot of conversation that goes on beforehand and review of the documents to make sure that the schedule is including everything that should be included.
But is the expectation when things are retained they're publicly available under FOI, or is there a provision that certain things can be deemed as sensitive with a time limit before they can be discoverable?
There's all of that process happens, but that's separate to the retention and disposal schedules. It's about listing what the public body has and when and what are those 4 options in terms of review or transfer or destruction, or retaining it within the public body when that is going to happen.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And I suppose just a wee follow-up to that before I come to you, Shannon, a wee follow-up. Is there a definition of the the categorisation process, because one person's sensitive or one public body sensitive may be another's historically vital, or is there a defined approach, or is that a kind of a professional judgment between PRONI and the public body, or how does that process unfold?
So the guidance that PRONI have issued around the creation of retention and disposal schedules is extremely detailed, and it goes through all of those steps. So there's an information management board that's set up, and it's very much an iterative quality assurance process that goes back and forth, particularly for those reasons, and for then anything that's particularly sensitive. There's a whole process around that, but that's before something's potentially released to the public. So that, again, it's sort of separate to the retention and disposal schedules. But from the guidance that I read, there's an immense amount of discussion that goes on before the finalisation, before it comes to the Assembly.
Yeah. There's also that good old commercially sensitive one which gets bandied about at times appropriately, and at times you'd wonder, is it appropriate or not? Thank you. Anyway, Karen, go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I think quite a few of my questions are more for PRONI. So, but there's a couple there that I'm just wondering, in the schedules, do public authorities have to say where or how things are going to be stored?
So I don't know off the top of my head, but I think from what I can remember of the schedules that I've looked at, so it's all set out in the guidance. So at the beginning you have to explain the working of the introduction to the retention disposal schedule, explain like the legislation that the public body itself works under, and so all of that detail is included, and then the schedule itself is what the category of document is, and how long it's going to be either retained or whether it's going to be destroyed and when that is, and that's all set out in each schedule.
I suppose I just have a bit of an interest in terms of where these documents are. Even if we are looking at that physical versus digitalisation, these documents, I suppose there's the cost element as well to public authorities for the storage of them, if they aren't able to be digitised. And it's just, I suppose, it's that interests me in terms of how are we understanding, if they're in physical format, where are they going to be and for how long, and then once they're allowed to be digitised, again, where are they stored? Is there a risk to that? We've seen, obviously, with the last few weeks, in terms of the kind of global hacking kind of stuff that's going on. So I'm just really interested in terms of that element of it.
I was in PRONI on Friday, and they had a conference, and a number of the archivists and curators have discussed what they're doing in terms of digitalisation, and what will be happening sort of between 2026 and 2027 is that the Northern Ireland Civil Service electronic records management system will come through to that 20-year rule. So there's a lot of work going on at the minute in terms of how that's going to be stored, retained, and again that process of going through all the records and what should be kept and how it's going to be kept and how it will be stored. So they're using a number, from what I can see, a number of different software packages, I think, that have been used in other jurisdictions as well. But it'd be worth speaking to PRONI.
Huge body of work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that they described it as a tsunami of records that are coming sort of from 2026, 2027, because it was 2007 when the electronic records management system started in the Northern Ireland Civil Service. So we're hitting that's the 20-year rule. Okay. It's.
Thank you so much for your paper. It was really, and especially to see how we are so much more kind of rigorous than other legislators. It was really interesting, so thanks very much for your work.
Thank you.
And the clerk tells me that the committee records are kept in the basement of Parliament buildings, so that's where they're kept.
This is where my brain goes to, where are these physical boxes of documents?
So they're down there, you can go down route around through them. We're not even electronic yet, I don't believe. So,
thank you. Thanks.
Okay, members, and I think that's everything. Any other questions, members, for Karen? No? Thank you very much, Karen. That's very, very useful. I can tell the minute you quote Article 663 verbatim that we have taken over your life for a period of weeks now. But that's, as ever, very, very useful. And thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, members. Thank you, members. So we'll return now to agenda item 4, as agreed, members. So draft minutes, and a copy of which are at your pack at page 7. Are members content to agree the minutes as drafted? Yep, content. Thank you, members. Matters raising, members, then, moving on to agenda item 5. So that you've been provided with a summary table of matters raising at page 17. Can I ask if members have any comments or issues they wish to draw out, highlight or seek briefings on in relation to 5.2 to 5.6? Go ahead, Sian.
Yep, so 5.3, this was something that I had raised, just the reply from the Charities Commission on the position of views and reserves. I think that's useful just to understand that I guess it's up to each organisation and each charity, but I think the wider issue still stands. I think that this is definitely a throwback from single-year budgets, and hopefully when we start to get into that multi-year budget cycle, it will help. But I just think that it is absolutely unreasonable to expect charities to use their reserves while they're awaiting decisions, particularly from departments and statutory bodies, when the reserves are limited, funding could be delayed. Again, Chair, I've had representation from organisations within the arts sector. That is it's just the sector that's most in touch with me about this, who are saying we have our 3-month funding until the end of June. We were given, that was kind of, I suppose, to tide us over. But you'll know yourself, if you are an arts organisation, how you plan anything on a 3-month budget. And I'm not saying it's not, I'm not attacking the Arts Council for this. I don't think it's their fault either. It is part of the system, but I just think that we are putting organisations in really, really difficult situations right now. And I don't know the answer, and I don't know how we fix that. I'm hopeful that multi-year budgets will help that, but I just think there has to be, particularly when it's a department, there has to be some kind of obligation there, to improve those timelines, to improve that communication, so they're not left in limbo year after year having to do this.
Yeah. It's one that does, and I'm picking that up as well. Like, it's certainly a problem. Okay, thanks, Sian. One that I wanted just in that group to flag up was 5.5 around the budget process, around a series of questions which we've got a series of answers for. One of them was around the geographical advertising of posts, and I know we have seen 1,000 posts previously went to certain areas, and more recently a further 1,000 posts going to Belfast. So I suppose my concern is, given, and I can see a potential rationale for why you wouldn't have geographical advertising in that sense, but what I would want to at some point further, and I'm not suggesting for today, to look at, in the absence of that, what else is being done to ensure that there is regional balance and it ties across, not only for the benefit of those people who may pick up on those jobs, but also, as I said, the department in their interest, given the vacancies and the skills deficit that we know all sectors of our community, including the civil service, are facing. So I think it's one just for again, that to keep an eye on around how that regional balance will be better delivered upon. So go ahead, Brian.
Chair, just on that same item of correspondence, I just note that the number of vacancies were increasing in the report we got last meeting, and it's in table 2 there. And just the recruitment process don't seem to be keeping pace with the number of vacancies. So I think it's the Department of Finance have responsibility for recruitment for the civil service. So I'm not sure if we've done that, but can we write to the Department of Finance to ask what steps they are taking to increase the rate of recruitment, through more recruitment exercises?
We've certainly corresponded at some point.
Yes, Chair, I have asked the Committee for Finance to let us know of any work that they are undertaking, looking at NICS recruitment issues more broadly. That very specific issue is not there included, but it could be that I would add, if you like. We haven't had a response yet, so I could add that to the list of questions that we've asked them whether they are considering those issues as a committee or whether they have information that may be of use to us. So I could add that to the list on that set of queries.
I mean, Table 1 in the correspondence, it shows the number of DFC vacancies referred to. The recruitment has increased substantially. You know, it was around 5,000, then became 1,400, and then 2,500 almost. Now the number of vacancies filled has risen a bit. 24-25 went up to 1,500, but still the gap has increased between the number of vacancies being referred on and the number being filled. So, I mean, it must be affecting work streams. So, I think we do just have to ask what measures they're taking to increase the rate of recruitment.
Members content with that? And if we are going back in that sense, then I would propose that we also ask about what specific steps are being taken to address and ensure a regional balance. If we're going back, members agreed with that element?
Mm-hmm. Just to follow on from Brian said, Chair, have we any plans to have the Permanent Secretary for Communities with us any time in the future? Soon?
So, Minister's here 3rd of July.
Yeah, but I'm not aware of the Permanent, although we may come.
It's just previously when the Permanent Secretary was before this committee and this issue was directed to him, he kind of was dismissive of it, that it wasn't even an issue. But since that, countless officials have said that it is a significant issue. And I'm just concerned that at a very senior level within the department it's not been taken as seriously as it should, because undoubtedly if there is significant vacancies, which I've been raising for since the return of the Assembly, and the gap is widening, as Brian rightly points out, then this is going to have a drastic impact on how the department is able to deliver, and particularly it will add further delay to various strategies that are lingering on without any progression or sufficient update. So I think we really need to get a handle on this. There's something deeply flawed about the whole process, and if the gap is widening, it's going to get worse and worse.
Chair.
So go ahead, Jan.
I think the AO competition, I think the results were posted yesterday. As far as I'm aware, I've started to get some communication from people who were involved in that process. I don't know if anybody else on the committee has too. 8 months for an AO competition is stressful. It's drawn out. It's not a conducive way to foster any kind of positive engagement within the workplace if you're constantly having that hanging over you. So I think there's definitely something around the process that we could be given feedback about. This is not how we treat staff. You know, that 8 months, it just seems to me to be very prolonged, and the correspondence that I've received, and I can forward that over to the committee clerk redacted if necessary, is just how stressful and prolonged it was.
Chair, that particular query around recruitment processes and a review of those, which was hinted at in one of our early briefings, is in my questions to the Committee for Finance.
Okay. Would it be useful if I forwarded you over the correspondence that I received if I take out names, or no?
Probably not,
okay,
to be honest with you. But I mean, feel free to talk. We'll talk about it.
But just as well, Chair, each and every week I'm having people, not specific to my own constituency, but right across Northern Ireland, that are raising concerns about the recruitment process and the challenges that are being faced by this online interviewing process as well. There's deep frustration with that, and countless issues. Just again, last night I received another from a very frustrated individual expressing concern about the process as well. So the department doesn't seem to be getting a handle on their management of this entire thing as well. And we can't underestimate anyone that's going forward for an interview. It's quite a stressful situation for somebody. And if they're having to redo it down to the fault of the system, ultimately run, I suppose, by the Department of Finance, then it's leading to further problems. And the turnaround times are shocking, to be honest. Maybe it's just cleaner for them to use agency staff, because that seems to be the direction of travel. But it needs to be addressed. There's no other way of
Okay, I don't know that I agree with the assessment about the Permanent Secretary not being concerned about that, but there are certainly issues of concern that I think we continue to raise. Would it be better that we get the response back from Finance, this updated query and response back, and then decide how we move forward in relation to the Department for Communities' responsibilities in terms of who we seek for briefing or whatever at that point?
Yeah.
Members content with that?
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So, moving on then to items 5.7 to 5.11. Do members have any issues there that they want to raise or flag up? No, members content. So, members, you've then been provided with a summary table of further matters arising at page 4 of your table papers. Can I ask if members have any comments or issues you wish to draw out, highlight or seek briefings in relation to in items 5.13 to 5.18? No, content there. Members?
Sorry, Chair. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
It was just a note. I really appreciated the responses from Belfast City Council and Lisburn and Castlereagh City Council and Armagh and Banbridge and Craigavon Council on the anti-poverty strategy. I think they had, particularly Belfast and Lisburn, really good, detailed information that let us know what is going on at a local government level. I think when you contrast that to some of the other responses we got last week from other councils who just went, yes, our anti-poverty strategy is on our website. I think that was really useful to understand, I suppose, that level. But it also highlights to me the joined up connections that we need to make once this anti-poverty strategy is actually released, that it has to permeate through all levels of government, and we have to link in once we get the strategy in with our local government colleagues as well.
Yeah.
Chair, if I may, I propose that we've now had 7 responses from 11 possible, so we propose, with the committee's permission, to chase, and then I will provide a summary and a memo to go with that, so that can be, as you suggest, dovetailed into the other work, but also compartmentalised neatly, because I do appreciate these are arriving over a number of weeks.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I think it's useful for us to see what's happening at that local government level, that actually are there places where we could engage as well, or ask the department to engage further too, and also are there any replications where we could make the process more efficient to help more people? Yeah,
absolutely agree. I think councils can and should and must play a key role here. They're closer to the ground. They understand. They know the people involved. They know, and it's key that we're coordinated across and using every pound to its maximum effect in this space. Okay, thank you for that, members. So moving on to items 5.19 to 5.2. So I've just dealt there with 5.13 to 5.18. Items 5.19 to 5.24. Is there anything members wish to draw out? No, members are content. And then finally, any comment on items 5.25 to 5.26, members? Everybody content. Okay. Yep. Okay, members, thank you. So otherwise content as per the clerk's memo. Moving on to agenda item 6 then, which is correspondence, and the correspondence memo is at page 77. So I will draw out and consider items by number and ask viewers to draw out, highlight or seek briefings in relation to any specific items of correspondence. So in terms of items 6.2 to 6.5, and if I can just say, members, in relation to item 6.2, the Chartered Institute of Housing there has asked to explore the possibility of hosting a housing roundtable discussion with the committee on a theme of mutual interest. Is that something members would like to consider?
Yeah, my only concern is that it was left just so open. They hadn't proposed the topic themselves. So, for context, they refer to something similar having happened in the past. So was this? Were they deemed to be an appropriate body that brings together, a wide range of interests? Then,
my understanding is that the last event was 10 years ago. So I have a little bit of information around that, but would always be the situation that this would be the committee's agenda and the committee's, if you like, the committee's event. Should there be a support role for them for them to take in that, then the committee may well seek to amend it. It wouldn't, I can imagine, be before the autumn anyway, so there will be time to arrange that. But certainly it would be a committee event with a committee agenda and input on that. So.
Okay. And maybe if members are agreed, we'll ask the clerk to take a look at what an area of specific interest and of relevance to such a meeting might be, and consider then how we.
No, housing is always an issue of concern.
Yeah, and it's a matter of ensuring that it's being dealt with in a way that it's adding value to, and if it's focused, I think it certainly could do that. So let's say for now do that, and then we can see where that takes us. Members of that. Okay. So, any other comments on items?
Sean.
Sorry, Sean, go ahead.
Yeah, just on 6.3 on the EQIA of last year. I just want to raise on the back of last week's presentation from the Northern Ireland Commissioner for Children and Young People to raise that it is unacceptable that a child risk impact assessment isn't being done. That only one department in the Assembly is looking at a CREA. So, and that was mentioned within that document, that given this department looks after so many things that impact on children's lives, not least child poverty, that we need to ask the department to seriously consider putting in place child risk impact assessments going forward for every budget decision.
Yeah, I think it's a fundamental underpinning exercise, and members content with that proposal? Right.
Is that a right? That's a right to the
to write to the department and ask them to. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, members, there's a further summary table then in your table papers at page 73. Do members have any comment on issues contained in that item under 6.7 to 6.8? No, members content then, otherwise with the correspondence memo. Thank you. Moving on then, we've taken item 7, moving on to agenda item 8, forward work programme. So a copy of which is at page 289, members. Any comments, or are you content to note the forward work programme, Andy?
Just the LCM that was scheduled on the forward work programme, is it dropped off, or am I not seeing it on the current one? The pathways to work, sorry, that is.
Checking for you now, Andy.
Have we got that, John?
I think it was the 12th of June it was originally on the previous forward work programmes.
Bear with me 1 second. Apologies, Chair. We think that may be a typo, Andy, but we'll come back and we'll let the committee know.
Just interested to know if it's still scheduled.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Thanks for that.
Well made point, Andy. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, so we'll get that checked. Are members otherwise content with the proviso that is being checked, and will be obviously coming back at the next meeting again? Members content to agree that forward work programme? Okay, thank you. Agenda item 9 then, members. Any other business? Do members have any other business they wish to raise today? No. Thank you then. So agenda item 10 is date, time and location of the next meeting. So our next meeting will be at 10 a.m. on Thursday, 29th of May 2025 in room 29, at which we expect to hold 2 further evidence sessions on the sign language bill. As next Monday is a bank holiday, the pack will issue tomorrow. And I remind members that we are now having a tour of the PRONI facilities, but this meeting is now adjourned.